Morning falls like rain into the city life. There goes another night. Losing my breath in waves, knowing that every crash is bleeding the hourglass and taking the stride from all our lives. Everyone keeps talking, they promise you everything, they don't mean anything. We may lose our focus, there's just too many words we're never meant to learn, and we don't feel so alive. Say goodbye, these days are gone, and we can't keep holding on when all we need is some relief through these hard times. Through these hard times. Move your hands in circles, keeping me hypnotized, the power behind your eyes. Move around your bedroom, cursing the naked sky. You should be here tonight, but you stay alone and cry. Say goodbye, these days are gone, and we can't keep holding on when all we need is some relief through these hard times. Oh, there's something missing. Oh, you'll never feel it but you. Oh, you're gonna feel it when it's gone. When it's gone. Say goodbye, these days are gone, and we can't keep holding on when all we need is some relief through these hard times. Yeah, these hard times. Oh, no, hard times. Hard time. Say goodbye, these days are gone. Say goodbye, these days are gone. These days are gone.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Waterhouse, and I'm here at Northwest Park. We're part of Voices Against Lyme Disease CT. This is a Windsor-based Lyme disease program, nonprofit 501c3. We have partnered today with this wonderful park, Northwest Park folks, as well as the Windsor Health Department, in bringing this event here to Windsor.
Age distribution for Lyme disease for Connecticut and nationally, the highest rate has typically been in children, with another peak in those in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Okay? The lowest rate's in 20-year-olds. Why?
They're not outside.
They're not outside. PlayStation, Game Boy, whatever. Anyway. But interestingly, the Connecticut data by age distribution for 2015, all the statistics for Lyme are available on the Department of Public Health's website. we've seen a much larger peak occurring in those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. I don't know why. But obviously we're seeing a much greater exposure occurring in older individuals for some reason here more recently. Okay? So, I'm just going to quickly, this is mainly a tick talk, but I'm going to quickly go through some of the symptoms of some of these diseases. I'll just quickly recap Lyme. Obviously, early infection in most people is characterized by the distinctive expanding rash known as erythema migrans, seen in about 70-80% of people. And if you don't do anything, it's a slow expanding rash. If you don't do anything, it'll disappear in about 4 weeks. It'll go away on its own. So, and it's often quite circular in pattern. You'll hear the comment, it's called bullseye. Well, only about 15% of the rashes actually take on that really true characteristic, multiple looking bullseye appearance. Okay? The rash itself is not itchy, rarely. It may be warm to the touch. It's easy to miss, too. If you're single and it's on your back, and you're not looking in a mirror, you might miss it. Or if the tick was feeding on your scalp, your rash may be up here. And unless, like a few of us, where we're starting to lose a few hairs, you're never going to notice it. Okay? So the rash appears anywhere from a few days to about a month after the tick bite, at the site of the tick bite, but the average is about a week. And then with or without the rash, whether it's either present or not present, or you just didn't notice it, you'll also have those similar, what they call those little flu-like viral infection symptoms, joint fatigue, headache, you just don't feel good. That's your localized infection. Then the spirochetes disseminate through the skin, and they're only transiently present in the blood. So, to other body tissues, and then you start seeing more of those flu-like symptoms, more fatigue, muscle and joint pain, the chills and fever, headache, and so on. About 15% of people will have multiple secondary skin lesions elsewhere in the body as the spirochete spreads through the skin tissues. Then, weeks or even months after the initial infection, if you're not diagnosed and treated, about half, roughly, of individuals will develop arthritis, usually affecting the large joints. About 10% will develop neurologic Lyme symptoms, the most common initial one being Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of your facial muscles. And you can also have headache, stiff neck. You can get tingling in your fingers and so forth, and the extremities. If it gets into the central nervous system, you have those forgetfulness, changes in memory, mood, or sleep, and some cognitive impairment. And then about 5 to 8% of people can have a heart block. And there's been a couple of cases where people have actually died from the heart block. That's the only aspect of Lyme that's going to kill you, potentially. It's a very debilitating disease. It's not considered generally, with those very few exceptions, a fatal disease, unlike a few other ones. Okay? So the real controversy sometimes comes in the serologic testing, and you hear a lot of this about, why can't we just test for the Lyme bacteria? Remember I said it's only in the blood for a brief time, and the spirochete numbers are very low. All those symptoms are triggered by very few bacteria. It's not like some other bacterial infections where you can go in and culture or, directly observe the bacteria. Okay? It's very hard to actually recover directly those bacteria. So we rely on antibody testing, and that's true for a lot of diseases. And so right now, the current test is a two-tiered antibody testing system where they've used an enzyme-linked immunoassay, which is very sensitive, but not very specific, so it can cross-react with other conditions as well. And if that is positive, or suggestive that it's maybe positive, then they conduct a more specific Western immunoblot. So the specificity of this two-tier testing is pretty high, okay? And now they've actually, a lot of it's done with whole cell Borrelia burgdorferi as the antigen in the test, but a lot of tests now are using the VSL-EC6 peptide antigen, which increases the sensitivity and specificity of the test quite a bit. The problem with it is it's an antibody test, and it takes 2 to 4 weeks, as long as 6 to 8 weeks, for your initial antibodies, your IgM antibodies, to peak. And those decline. Those are the first ones that are generated, followed by your IgG antibodies, and they develop in 4 to 8 weeks and peak to 4 to 6 months. So one of the common problems is you go in, I think I got Lyme disease, you got a rash. That should be a clinical diagnosis right there. But you've got a rash, you don't feel good, summer, high risk, you live in a high risk area. Oh, I think you got a negative test. Oh, you don't have Lyme disease. Well, yes, you do. It hasn't been long enough for you to develop an antibody titer that'll be picked up by the test. You will have a negative test. So in that, sensitivity to the test is actually pretty high, but you may want to go back and have another follow-up test if you test negative to begin with, because you will in those very early stages. What's really hard for clinicians is it a reinfection or not? Because antibody titers can stay elevated for a long time, but you can get bitten by another tick and get Lyme disease again. The antibodies that are produced are not protective. They will not prevent another infection. It's not like some viral diseases where once you've got it once, you're immune for life. Not the case with this. Okay? So what you have then yep, I'm going the wrong way. Real quick, what I'm just trying to outline here is that, here's real quick. So you've got your first test. If it's positive and signs or symptoms, you do a second test, Western blot. If you have a negative result, you might want to consider another alternative diagnosis, or if your symptoms are consistent with Lyme disease and it's under 30 days, that's what I was saying, you may want to consider a subsequent follow-up test. Okay? So again, the main point is Lyme disease, if you have a history of exposure in a Lyme disease endemic area, if you're not in a Lyme area, the probability that it's actually Lyme is pretty low. But if you are, then yeah. If you have an erythema migrans, you don't need to test. There's your clinical diagnosis right there. If you don't have the rash, but all the other symptoms and risk factors and tick exposure suggest it to be Lyme, then yes, you're going to treat or test and treat for it. If they're very non-specific symptoms, how many get headaches and you feel tired? It doesn't have anything to do with Lyme disease. That happens all the time. Just because you're tired doesn't mean you have Lyme disease. All right, so what you need to do is, if that persists, you got to rule out other reasons too. Because one of the biggest problems sometimes is just getting a proper diagnosis. Lyme is very common. And so, yeah, you sometimes have a problem getting a correct diagnosis of Lyme disease, but in areas where Lyme disease is very high, sometimes you can have the reverse happen. Oh, you got Lyme disease. There was a woman who had a pediatric neurologic practice on Long Island. This was a talk that was given in one of the early symposiums a long time ago. And she had a child that went from doctor to doctor to doctor. Oh, you got neurologic Lyme, here's your pills. Oh, you got neurologic Lyme disease, here's your pills. Didn't get better. There should have been some response to the antibiotics. Ended up in her clinic, she says, well, wait a minute, you've been to 3 doctors, you've been on how many courses of antibiotics, and the child's getting worse. So she did a CAT scan, the poor child had a brain tumor. It wasn't Lyme. So just kind of, bear that in mind too. That was the point she was trying to make. When something's very common, you also got to remember, well, some other things pop up too. Okay. The other disease associated with our tick is babesiosis. It only became nationally reportable in 2011, but you can say that babesiosis is basically, again, where a black-legged tick is found, and we're starting to see an increase in the number of cases of this. This is a protozoan disease. Okay, it's like having malaria. It attacks your red blood cells. So in most people, the illness is self-limited. You may not even know you were sick or infected, but it can be severe, fatal in the elderly, immune-suppressed, or people that don't have a spleen. The spleen filters your red blood cells. Okay? So that's why the symptoms range from subclinical, mild flu-like illness to disease resulting in death. Mortality rate's about 5 to 9%. You can have co-infection, you can have babesiosis and Lyme at the same time, for example. And the symptoms of babesiosis is fatigue, you got your chills and sweats, headache and so forth. And interestingly enough, a lot of research is coming out that babesiosis increases the severity of acute Lyme disease, but it doesn't seem to have any effect on the clinical course of the babesiosis itself. So co-infection can make things a little more severe for Lyme. And it's treated with a different set of drugs. Remember, it's a protozoan, not a bacteria. In really severe cases where you have a lot of red blood cells infected, they'll actually do an exchange transfusion before they begin therapy. Anaplasmosis. Again, found mainly in the northeast and the upper Midwest. It's caused by the bacteria Anaplasma phagocytophilum, which attacks granulocytes, which is a type of white blood cell. And 90% of the cases are from 6 states. And it's been pretty flat. We haven't seen much of an increase here in Connecticut. It's kind of steady around 100 cases reported every year. So symptoms of this is fever, malaise, myalgia, shaking, chills, sweats, headache, and nausea. There's no real specific symptoms. You'll see a white drop in your white blood cell count and your platelet counts. Again, your clinical illness is greatest in older or immune-compromised people, but it responds very quickly to doxycycline. Okay, it's right there in their circulating blood and your white blood cells. It's not protected or anything like that, so response to therapy is very quick. Powassan virus. This is a new one. Well, actually, really not that new, but it was first described in 1958 and from a child that died from it in Powassan, Ontario. Again, hence the name Powassan virus. And it's transmitted by a tick called Ixodes cookii, it's kind of like a woodchuck tick. It will feed on humans. We get a few specimens every year. That's the classical or first lineage or strain of Powassan virus. But then a form of Powassan was identified in our black-legged tick called the deer tick virus. And so what we've seen is about 2% of the adult ticks that our scientists have found have been infected with this virus, but we don't have a human case reported in Connecticut yet. If you look at nationally, there are 12 cases in 2013, 8 cases in 2014. If you look at the distribution of cases, a lot of them are occurring up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. New York here between 2004 and 2013 had 17 cases. Massachusetts had 1. Maine had 2. We haven't actually had a confirmed case in Connecticut yet, but it's out there. But Powassan virus, it's kind of similar like West Nile. Many people that get it will not actually get sick. But if it infects the central nervous system, it can cause encephalitis and meningitis. Symptoms include fever, headache, vomiting, weakness, some paralysis. As it progresses to full meningoencephalitis, you get confusion, loss of coordination, speech difficulties, and seizures. About half of those that have this and survive, and it has about a 10% fatality rate, will have permanent neurologic symptoms, such as recurrent headaches, muscle wasting, and memory problems. It's not a nice virus, but fortunately not very common. Borrelia miyamotoi is kind of interesting. It was first described from Japan in 1995. It was first detected by a postdoctoral student in Dr. Gerlin Fish's lab at Yale in 2001. We didn't know whether it was a human pathogen, because a lot of these Borrelia are not human pathogens, actually. But we didn't know whether it caused human disease. And interestingly enough, he put in a grant proposal to NIH to try to do some research to find out whether it was a human pathogen. NIH responded, well, we're not going to fund this. We don't know whether it's a human pathogen. Well, okay. But the first human cases of Borrelia miyamotoi were reported from Russia in 2011 with influenza-like illness. It was treated successfully with antibiotics, and human cases have now been described here in Connecticut and the United States with symptoms like chills, sweat, headache, fatigue, neck stiffness, and so on. There is no commercial test yet for this particular Borrelia. This is a relapsing fever Borrelia. It's more closely related to relapsing fever than it is to our Lyme Borrelias. So that's a really quick summation of the diseases. So at this point, I'm going to switch gears and talk about prevention, integrated tick management. You know, it's been a real, like I said in my first slide, it's been a real ongoing issue. How do we control exposure? We don't have a human vaccine. The one human vaccine was taken off the market in 2002. It was largely a marketing decision because the company was estimating they were only going to sell 10,000 doses in 2002, so that was not sustainable. They took it off the market. It was fairly effective after 3 doses, about 79% effective. But there were a lot of allegations made against the vaccine. There was also a class action lawsuit against the company alleging it was causing some symptoms. Those weren't ever substantiated, but nonetheless, we don't have a human vaccine. So what do? We have personal protection measures. We can do landscape modifications. Our tick, black-legged tick, is very sensitive to low humidity. It requires high humidity to survive, like you find in the forest floor, in the leaf litter, underground cover, like Pachysandra and ground myrtle, that kind of stuff. You're not going to find them out in that sunny lawn out there. That's not where it likes it. At low humidity, it doesn't survive for very long. Chemical control. A lot of interest in botanicals or so-called natural chemical compounds. Biological control is an area we've looked at. Host reduction or exclusion, host-targeted acaricides, and host-targeted vaccines are all approaches that have been taken trying to reduce tick numbers. Now, interestingly, to begin with, where's your greatest Lyme disease risk? This was a survey that was done by the Stanford Health Department for ticks that were being submitted to the experiment station for testing. And they asked the people, where did you think you picked up the tick? And 74% said they picked it up outdoors at home. 21% said they picked it up away from the home, either hiking like a trail or something like that. And 4% right there in the neighborhood, maybe at a friend's house or something, okay? What were they doing? Well, most of the ticks that came in were identified, the risk activity was play. 18% yard work, 12% gardening, which kind of corresponds with that age distribution. Children going out there playing in the woods and so forth, high risk. And then you have a home ownership and start doing all those yard and gardening activities, you're also at risk, okay? So basically, most people probably pick up ticks right in their own backyard, but that's not to say you can't pick them up elsewhere. So when you look at your home, think of the woods as the tick zone. That's where the ticks are. So what you want to do is reduce the number of ticks coming into the yard where your family spends most of their time and create as much as you can a tick-safe zone. Again, and this can be done by spraying insecticides, it can be done by doing some landscaping and that kind of stuff. And swing sets, okay? Where do most people put the swing sets? In the shade, in the woods. Okay, kids, go out and get ticks and get Lyme disease. I understand why a hot day like this, who wants to have the swing set out there, you know, smack in the hot sun. But nonetheless, got it up there in the woods, that's where your risk of picking up a tick is. So your first line of defense, of course, is your personal protection measures. So if you're doing a high-risk activity like hiking in a really ticky area, or gardening, or some leaf raking, or something like that, how many wear long pants and tuck them in their socks? Nobody? Now, I don't have to do it at my house, fortunately, because I haven't found any ticks in the woods right behind my property yet. I'm lucky. But nonetheless, you want to keep the ticks crawling up on the outside. You can use a skin-based repellent. DEET, piperidine, you know, oil of lemon eucalyptus, some of these other repellents that are available. Permethrin-based tick repellent for clothing use, and permethrin-treated clothing. And of course, when you come back, you want to bathe and do some tick checks. And there's a lot of repellents out there on the market, and so you might find useful. The EPA has a repellent, insect repellent website to help you pick out a repellent. So does the National Pesticide Information Center. And Consumer Reports just came out with their summer July issue where they talk about how well sunscreens work, but they also cover repellents as well. And they have 3 that they tend to recommend, which would be a 20% lemon eucalyptus 20% picaridin, or 30% DEET. And the EPA is planning on having, like your SPF on a sunscreen to come out with a symbol that could be voluntarily put on a repellent to tell you what it protects against, like mosquitoes, ticks, or both, and how long you can expect it to be effective. Kind of help it make it easier to pick out a repellent. I certainly don't have time to go through all of these. I do have a fact sheet available on our website that covers insect repellents and how well they work against ticks. DEET works, it's fine. A lot of people don't like it, but actually it has a pretty good safety profile. It gets a bad rap, but you think about it. Since 1955, millions and millions of people have used DEET every year, and the number of adverse reactions is very low. That said, a lot of people don't like it too because it just doesn't feel very good. Cosmetically, it just doesn't.
Does it have to go on the skin, or can it just go on the clothes?
Both. But remember, DEET's also a plasticizer, so it will dissolve, it will mess up the finish on your car. It will mess up your nice plastic glasses and that kind of thing. So make sure you wash your hands and that kind of stuff, and don't stick the DEET repellent container on the hood of your car. Okay? But you need at least 30% DEET for ticks. Okay? There's a controlled release formulation of DEET as well that'll last a lot longer. Picaridin is a new one. A lot of people like it because it's not oily or greasy. Oil of lemon eucalyptus is repellent to ticks. But a lot of these other kind of products are not all that effective. What I use when I'm out doing tick research is I use this permethrin-based clothing repellent. It's basically available in sporting goods stores. Repel's one brand, Sawyer is another brand. You spray your socks and pants, let it dry, get dressed, any ticks that come in contact with those clothes are killed. It's a very effective defense against ticks. May not be ideal for all situations, like a hot day like this. I know everybody's wearing shorts, but nonetheless, that's an option. And there are companies, Insect Shield, Orvis, Columbia, all sell a line of pre-treated clothing. This idea was first developed by the military for combat fatigues, where the permethrin is impregnated right into the fabric, and it'll last over 70 washings. You can actually, one company, you can actually give your favorite gardening outfit. You can send it in and they will treat it and send it back to you. Okay? So that's another option as well. So what are you going to do if you get a tick bite? Okay, you've done the tick check, you look for that small tick all over and everything, and you found one that's attached. Okay. Well, first of all, understand how ticks feed. They're not like mosquitoes with their hypodermic mouth parts that come in, they feed for 2 minutes and they're gone. Ticks have to set their mouth parts and they feed for days. Okay, so a nymphal deer tick feeds for 4 days before it's fully engorged with blood. An adult female deer tick feeds for 5 to 7 days before it's fully engorged and drops off. So if you find a fully engorged tick on your bed sheets, where it fell off, it's been on you all those days. You didn't do your tick check. So the tick mouth parts, this is a nymph, this is an adult. You have the so-called head of the tick. You have your pouch, which are sensory in function. Here's the actual mouth parts. You have 2 chelicerae with the teeth on it, and like the hypostome is like a lower lip with all these recurved denticles on it. So the tick cuts into the skin, inserts the mouth parts, and then actually secretes a cement-like material right around the mouth parts. Deer ticks don't secrete very much. Dog ticks secrete a lot of it, so they're gluing themselves to you. Hold on. And then they start spitting and sucking. And so what they do is they secrete a lot of pharmacologically active compounds, vasodilators, okay, proteases to dissolve tissue, anticoagulants so the blood doesn't clot. And what they do is they create this little microscopic blood cavity in the skin that the blood pools into. And so they're spitting and sucking. And so they take up the blood, most of the water gets recycled back to the salivary glands, and they begin to feed. So here you can see the pouch on the surface of the skin. Here's the mouth parts in the skin. Here's that cement-like layer, and here's that feeding lesion right there underneath the skin. So when you find a tick attached, you want to remove it. I prefer fine-tip forceps A lot of the tick removal devices are really designed for like fully engorged dog ticks, big ticks. Those nymphs are small. So I like jeweler's forceps, that's my preferred kind of tool. Just grab the tick as close to the skin as possible and gently and firmly just pull it out. If the head of the tick, those mouth parts, not the head, get broken off, it won't affect whether you get Lyme disease or not. You've either removed the tick in time or you have not. Okay, so if you look at how a tick feeds, the spirochetes that cause Lyme disease are in the tick gut. When the tick begins to feed, those spirochetes multiply. And they actually have to travel from the tick gut through the body of the tick to the salivary glands before they get injected in. So that's why you have a delay in transmission. And the spirochete also has to change. In the gut, it expresses an outer surface protein called OSP-A. It's an adhesion molecule that holds the spirochete against the tick gut. As it travels to the salivary glands, it quits making OSP-A and starts making OSP-C, which seems to be essential for mammal infection. Okay, so you've got a multiplication that has to occur, and then you also have that change in the outer surface coat of the bacteria, so they become infectious to humans or mammals. Okay, and so all that process is why you have a delay in that movement of the spirochetes into the feeding site in the skin. So, generally at 24 hours, an infected tick is attached, you still have 0% transmission. By 48 hours, you're starting to get those spirochetes, or the infectious spirochetes arriving in the salivary glands, so you have about a 12% transmission rate, and then of course it goes up quite dramatically from there. Powassan virus is an exception. It can be transmitted within 15 minutes after attachment. But you also have a delay in transmission from Babesia and Anaplasma, too, for different reasons. The Babesia organism is already in the salivary glands, but it actually has to, when the tick feeds, it begins a maturation process. It has to change, it changes before it can actually be transmitted. So you still have a delay. So those tick checks are important.
Question, has any research been done, or is there any anecdotal evidence that if a tick doesn't fully feed and gets removed from the host, to seek a second host? When it's already primed, so to speak.
That can happen. I don't think it's common.
Okay.
I have on rare occasions, I have picked up a partially engorged tick. In other words, it was groomed off the host without killing it or damaging it, and didn't quite get enough, and it still sought another host. Yes, that can occur. I don't think it's real common, but yes.
Okay. I'm thinking in terms of like pets, cats that bring in.
Yeah, so I mean, something like that could happen. It's groomed off and it didn't quite get enough blood, then it might quest again. Right. So we do have a tick testing laboratory. There's a form on our website. This is a free service offered to Connecticut residents. We will test engorged nymphal and female black-legged ticks for Lyme, babesiosis, and anaplasmosis. Dr. Godard Malay, a couple of years ago, took over the tick testing laboratory. He's a molecular biologist, and we used to just test for Lyme, but he improved our PCR techniques, and we now test for all three of them.
So it's only when they're engorged that you would conduct a test?
Right, because if you're successful and you pull off a tick that's flat,
Gotcha.
and there's no evidence that it's starting to feed in there and you send it to us, we won't test.
I think there's a lot of people that think that you're supposed to always, bring the tick to your doctor or send it out for testing, even if it's not engorged.
If it's not engorged, if you know that if you went out and you knew you were doing a high-risk activity, you were gardening that day, you know that tick wasn't there the day before, yeah, then you're probably okay. I think the exceptions that would be very rare, because the mechanism of transmission is pretty well known. Okay, so the results from last year, we had almost 3,500 ticks submitted, a little over 3,000 were black-legged ticks, Ixodes scapularis, 9.2% were American dog ticks, we had 2% were Lone Star ticks, 71 of them, and then we had 19 other tick species, including 5 Ixodes cookii, which is a vector for Powassan virus. The results for that, 53.7 of those ticks were not infected. Remember, not every tick bite is going to lead to infection. 31.5% of the ticks, this is nymphs and adults, were infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, the Lyme disease pathogen. 11% by Babesia microti. You know, that causes babesiosis. We're starting to see an increase in the percentage of ticks that are infected with the Babesia organism. 5% by Anaplasma, Borrelia and Babesia both 4%. The Borrelia and Anaplasma 2%. Babesia and Anaplasma 0.1%. And then 0.2% of the ticks had Borrelia, Babesia, and Anaplasma. And if that was your tick, you just won the lottery. Because you can get, like I said, co-infection. One tick can transmit more than one pathogen at the same time. But that's not to say that you could have one tick that gives you Lyme and you have another one that gives you something else that you miss. It's not uncommon to have more than one tick bite at the same time. You may have caught one, I found the tick, but then you missed the other one. That's not unusual either. So the most common way of controlling ticks is spray. Either using a synthetic chemical insecticide, but what I've been doing a lot of work with is what we call biopesticides. And what I've been working with is a product now called Met52. It is a fungus, Metarhizium anisophili. This is a naturally occurring insect fungus. Levels in the soil of these kinds of entomopathogenic fungi is very low. Background infection rate in ticks is only about 1 or 2%. Very low. So what this product is, it's done in fermentation vats. It's a suspension of the spores of the fungus. You spray it just like you would an insecticide. When you apply it, if the ticks come in contact with those spores, they will get infected. And like this female tick right here, develop mycosis and die. So it's a biopesticide. It's a biocontrol. It's an alternative, not quite as effective as a chemical, but it's an alternative for those that don't want to use chemicals. And we're currently getting about, you can expect about, 74 to 80% control with it. Maybe a little less.
Does that have to have direct contact with
The spores would have to make direct contact with it.
So if you're spraying leaf litter and the tick is under a leaf litter, it's not going to get...
Yeah, I mean, that's a factor. You've got to get it, under there. If the ticks are under there. But the ticks come up and down, they quest. That's a problem that we'll see with a lot of natural products, okay? A lot of interest in that, but the problem with these so-called 25B, this is a list of EPA-accepted safe compounds, like cedar, geranol, garlic, cinnamon, all of these. So what companies do, they can formulate and make all sorts of claims with it. It's the greatest tick repellent, it's the greatest tick stuff, it's the greatest deer protection for your plants, whatever. They don't have to prove efficacy. Okay, so what the problem with it is that also you really don't know what's in there. So they're taking essential oil and you really don't know what's in there. Okay? And it's not persistent. They break down quite readily. So there's no persistent control with it as well. One compound that I did a lot of work with, Nucatone, we had a lot of success with it. It's a component of essential oil from Alaska yellow cedar, or you can even get it from grapefruit, but it's very expensive. It's used by the cosmetic industry and the food industry in very small amounts as a flavoring agent. And so the methods of making it, they don't need huge quantities, so it's quite expensive. But it's slightly phytotoxic, so I'm not sure where that'll come along. Some research using it as a repellent, might be a useful additional human skin repellent as well. I did some studies with garlic, kind of suppressed tick activity for a while, but most of these natural products are not very effective at all, unfortunately. And that includes cedar. How many of you are familiar with the rules on treating for schools and daycares? Under Connecticut law, turf and ornamental areas, including trees, only pesticides that are exempt from EPA registration requirements can be applied to the grounds of public or private preschools or schools with students in grades K through 8. Only pesticide applications that will be allowed for turf and ornamental applications will be pesticides that are exempt from EPA registration, which is those 25B ones I just mentioned, which don't work. So it really puts schools and daycare centers in a bind. What do you use? What you're allowed to use isn't effective. Okay? You can get exceptions. Applications of pesticides may be allowed to eliminate a threat of a human health as determined by the local health director or the Commissioner of Environmental Protection or school superintendent. But nuisance pests such as dog ticks, biting flies, or mosquitoes, in the absence that they are actually carrying disease, are not considered a threat sufficient to justify control. So it does put daycares in a little bit of a bind. Really? Okay. Post-targeted control, I've done a lot of research with this. I'm actually not going to go into a whole lot of detail with this. We've looked at exclusion of deer by fencing. This was a study I did with high tensile electric deer fencing. With deer reduction, and even treatment with deer with these little four-poster devices where you actually put pesticide on the deer that come in and rub up against the rollers. There was a study in Mumford Cove in Groton, Connecticut. The community decided to reduce deer from 200 deer per square mile in that community down to 13, and the number of Lyme disease cases in that community went. Monhegan Island, Maine, where deer were introduced in 1955 for hunting purposes, that about 13% of the population was getting Lyme every year. They decided to just eliminate all the deer on the island. They don't have any ticks anymore. Okay, but that's not an approach that can be used everywhere. The other approach is using products to target the white-footed mice and eastern chipmunks. I'll skip this one. So what we're doing right now is a study in Reading, what I call an integrated tick management project. We're using that Met52 I just talked about, and we're using these rodent bait boxes, which I'll introduce you to. And then we started the study using a reservoir-targeted vaccine. It's an oral rodent Lyme vaccine. Bait. So, the bait boxes, basically the concept behind this product is you have a box, entry points where the mice and chipmunks can go in to get at a non-toxic food block, and there's a wick here that contains fipronil. How many of you know use Frontline on your dogs and cats? That's what this is, it's Frontline. So basically we're putting Frontline on the mice. So the mice, instead of running around the environment and infecting ticks, will run around the environment and kill ticks. That's the concept behind that product. So what we're doing, what we found, is that at the home sites where we're using a combination of the box and the Met52, in 2013, 14, and 15, we had a significant reduction in the number of questing or host-seeking ticks on the property. We had 85, 71, and 92% control for the 3 years respectively, and we have a much lower density of ticks on the mice as well. So it seems to be having some effect. This company has developed a reservoir-targeted vaccine. It's an OSPA vaccine. The idea is if you can reduce the infection prevalence in the rodents, then you'll have fewer infected ticks. And so we started a study with this in Reading as well. And what we did in 2014, we did a bait consumption using a wildlife guide called Rotamine B. We had showed that 91% of the mice were consuming the bait, which is very good. And we started distributing the actual vaccine bait in 2015, and we're doing it again in 2015. And eventually here, in the not too distant future, I'll have some results on that. So, these are all our what I call our tick-borne disease toolbox. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail. I just briefly highlighted most of these. I'm running out of time. But where do we stand right now? We're seeing an increased distribution of ticks, which I showed you earlier. Lyme disease case numbers nationally are higher than ever. There's a lot of polarization. Lyme tends to be somewhat controversial, and sometimes those arguments overshadow this whole prevention message, unfortunately. But who's responsible for tick control? Is it you in your own yard? Is it the community as a whole? Some of the methods we've looked at would probably be more effective if everyone got together and did it, like the bait boxes. Limited effectiveness on an individual home. What we found when we first tested it on Mason's Island, Mystic, Connecticut, every home had the boxes. We wiped the ticks out on the island. Difference. So currently there's no magic bullet for this. And what we need to do is we basically need additional tools to try to reduce tick numbers in the absence of a human vaccine. We just, I helped organize, we just had a conference here in Washington, D.C. in May, where it brought all of the tick control experts across the country together to basically kind of talk about where we stand and where we go, what kind of new research initiatives could be done. And of course, my tick handbook is available on our website.
I basically wanted to just talk about how I lived with it for 25 years so far. One of the things that it really affected me with was pain, severe pain at times, and a lot of times I ended up in the hospital for various different neurological issues. So, you know, they talk about chronic Lyme and the residual effects of chronic Lyme and stuff like that. I don't know what they call it, like my mom said, but I would venture to guess that it's more of a neurological effect that you already have from the Lyme disease whenever you had it, or the babesiosis whenever you had it. So for me, that's basically what I'm talking about. So I have a wife who's here and 2 children who are here. And one of the biggest things that that hit me probably, I don't know, 5 years ago, was that I couldn't pick them up anymore because my hands just wouldn't allow it. And that hit me really hard because, you know, as a father who loves their kid, you know, kids, I couldn't do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do. And even now, it's really, really difficult for me to do it. I'm actually out on disability right now. And that's a whole other story with disability, even paying for me being out. But for me, the effects with my kids is a huge thing. For my wife as well. I mean, my wife is a saint. She really is, and she does everything around the house. We have great friends and community that help out too, but my wife really, really is a special person to be able to deal with my stuff for so long. We've been married for about 14 years, well, 15 years, sorry. And it's been a rough ride for a lot of that. We've been living in Windsor for about 9 years now? 7. And that has been a great help to live here because this is where a lot of our friends are. My mom also lives in Windsor as well. So one of the things that I've had to deal with is memory issues. The neurological effects of Lyme are huge, and so when it gets into the memory banks and the cognitive functioning, even this past February or March, I couldn't have conversations with people anymore. I had to. I'm a member, a very active member in our church, and I just couldn't speak with people anymore. So I kind of backed myself away a little bit because it was just hard to remember conversations. Like I'm in the middle of a conversation, I have no clue how I got there, what I was even talking about or anything. You know, and so it's a very difficult disease. You look at Colin's story, I think, right? I mean, you see how a child is affected. And a parent is affected in a very different way because you want to protect your kids from going outside, protect your kids from, you know, going into the woods and all this stuff, but you're just not able to do that, you know. And so we spray, which is great, but my son's part of Cub Scouts, and he's gone hiking and camping and stuff, and so it's scary at times to see that. So for me, I think over these last few months, the fight that I've had for disability, to actually, for the company to pay disability, it's been huge. I haven't been paid since February. So I've been out of work since February and I haven't been paid. So to go through that struggle, that's another struggle for the family. We see how it affects the family financially. I mean, the insurance, basically I got a letter, the insurance company basically said that we do not believe in chronic Lyme. That's pretty much what they said. And so therefore, you don't have active Lyme, and we're not going to pay. So we're appealing that with a lawyer now and everything else, but still, to jump through these hoops when you have legitimate, I mean, you probably saw me, I can't really even walk upstairs very well. So I get, tired out very easily. Just, I have to plan, like if I'm going to do something today, I have to figure out if it's going to be okay for me to do something tomorrow. And I can't plan ahead, because if I plan ahead and I get to that day, it's just, it throws it off for me, and if I'm not feeling well, I can't make it. So there's a lot of effects that I have. So.
I have been treating Lyme. I've been pulling ticks off of people for over 25 years. I used to practice in the Bethel, Newtown area before moving up to the Newington area. So I'm assuming everybody here has a good idea about Lyme. I do treat acute and chronic Lyme. I'm a naturopathic physician. That means that I use nutrition, botanical medicine, physical therapies, lifestyle counseling. I use a collective of tools, and if you had a tick-borne illness for a long period of time, indeed it needs to be a collaborative approach. Antibiotics can only reach certain areas. They can't reach every area of the body. All antibiotics, whether they be pharmaceutical or even natural, don't necessarily address all life stages of all the organisms that cause these tick-borne illnesses. So what you really need is your immune system to be on board. Your immune system is really what's going to reach those other areas and help bring things under control. I began to notice probably over 20 years ago that there were certain organs that would tend to be at risk for Lyme to settle in. So it would be the thyroid, the heart, the bladder, your brain, and it's important to make sure that you're actually supporting those areas. Sometimes people say, well, I'm just tired just because I have Lyme disease. I'm going to use Lyme generic as tick-borne. It's not really just Lyme. And forget to look at the thyroid, and make sure that the thyroid is actually functioning properly. Thyroid can often be suppressed as a response to the illness, but if you ignore it, then you're not necessarily going to get where you need to go. So I just wrote like a few general notes because I've been treating Lyme for a long time, and so there's a lot. Nutrition, if we don't feed ourselves good food, then we can't expect our body to do what it needs to do. Getting fresh fruits and vegetables, limiting the sugar, limiting the simple carbohydrates, and a lot of this standard American diet really feeds these organisms, and it suppresses your immune system. You'll have reduced white blood cell activity, you'll have reduced white blood cell count, and it's hard to get better if you don't have your immune system on board. Over the years, I've also noticed that if there's any kind of neurological symptoms, you really need to support your brain. Basic neurotransmitter support can really be as simple as making sure that you have enough calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium in your diet. And how many people are magnesium deficient? These days we're learning more and more. Well, the general populace is beginning to understand that magnesium is very important. So sometimes with the little kids, the reason that they're having an issue is because their nutrition is not good. I get the calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium up to snuff, and then they start responding a lot better. Other times I will use like phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, that whole family. But for some people, if those simple approaches are not adequate, then do neurotransmitter testing. It's easy enough to do these days. I'm not really a lab-happy person. Most people that come to me have already been through all kinds of labs, and labs are good, but we all know that they can't tell us everything. The labs don't test for all the strains, and we don't have accurate labs for most of the tick-borne illnesses. So I try to, use a person's symptoms questionnaire to go from there. Let's see, what we did there. Sorry about the notes here, so you can eat good food, but it's also important to make sure that you're actually digesting that good food. And as we already know, that if you've had Lyme or tick-borne illness for a long period of time, or you've had a family member who's been sick for a long period of time, that's very stressful. And stress will reduce your enzymatic output and your hydrochloric acid output. So you might be eating good food, but if you're not digesting it and not absorbing it, or you might be taking all kinds of vitamins and supplements. A lot of times I'll have people come in, they've been taking handfuls of supplements, but no one looked to see whether they're actually digesting it and absorbing it. Because if you don't break it down, it's a waste of money, and we don't want to do that. Yes?
So how do you know if you're absorbing them or not?
Through
lab testing, or?
I could do lab testing. A lot of times symptomatically, you have gas, burping, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. If you have any abdominal symptoms or in that regards, then I'm just going to treat on those symptoms. If you have been taking really good nutritional support and we do just basic lab tests and you're deficient, then I'll go and run like a GI studies and look to see what's going on. I will often do hair mineral analysis on someone who's been chronically ill. Part of it is it's a real inexpensive way of looking at basic nutrition. Do you have enough calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, chromium, the essential nutrients? If you have enough of those, great. Sometimes it's a heavy metal issue. I had one gal, the reason she was battling Lyme is because she thought it would be great to build this little tomato garden, and she used railroad ties to make her little tomato garden, and she gave herself arsenic poisoning. And I would not have figured that out had I not done that mineral analysis. Why was your arsenic off the wall? What are you doing? What are you exposed to? Because she wasn't in an industry. She wasn't using pesticides. In fact, she was quite fanatical about not doing that. So we pulled it apart, and then she started talking about, well, she's growing her own vegetables and stuff like that. Okay, well now what did you build it with? But if I hadn't done that test, I wouldn't have known to ask those questions. And once we got the arsenic out of her system, her system turned around. She was out of work, and that was not good. She was supporting herself, and if you're out of work, it's not always good. And we can't always get support from other agencies. So I do find mineral analysis to be very helpful. The other thing too, just as an aside with mineral analysis, is that a lot of people are on their own wells in Connecticut. Yes, many people are on municipal water, but I actually called a patient the other day because their uranium was off the wall. Their well had never been tested for uranium, so now he's going to have it tested. But when the uranium is that high, most likely it's a well contamination issue. Now, the uranium that's being tested in the mineral analysis doesn't differentiate between the different isotopes, but we do know that it occurs naturally. In New England, we live on granite, and if your well is in a aquifer that is partially surrounded by granite, then indeed you can have that contamination. So uranium can just suppress the immune system. It can also increase your risk of cancers and stuff like that. But if you don't test, you don't know. You don't know what the roadblock is for why a person's not getting better. More and more information is becoming available about molds and how molds might be hampering a person's immune system and their ability to get better. And, so we'll have people do simple tests of their house if there's any kind of suspect that molds are causing problems. And, so I often get people who've been sick for a long, long time. So I'm a naturopath. I look at the whole person. I don't really treat a disease per se. Like if you have Lyme, you get this. It doesn't really work that way in my office. If you come in, you have a whole constellation of symptoms, and then it's a matter of pulling things apart. What's contributing to your symptoms? Are there certain ways that you are innocently making it more difficult for your body to get better, to bring itself back into balance? Often if I remove these roadblocks, then I may not have removed everything, but the rest of the body gets strong enough that it can start compensating, or else we can get other clues as to what is keeping you from really bouncing back and restoring health. I'm not God, I can't help everybody 100%, but I have a kid actually who's just totally excited he's back in college. You know, he was out of school for 4 years. I've been working with him for the last 2.5 years, but you know, he's moving to California next week, and he's just totally excited that he's able to, you know, get out of his parents' house. He don't want to be back in his parents' house, and getting on with his life. You know, his brain is present enough. He knows that he can think clearly enough, and he's confident enough that he's going to be able to move across the U.S. and know that he can pull it off. He does know that, you know, maybe he's going to rest a little bit here and there as he gets things back on board, and he's just so much healthier. So, so it's a tricky situation for sure. Some patients don't really have an active tick-borne illness anymore, but they've picked up like Epstein-Barr, cytomegalo, or one of the other viruses that can cause a chronic fatigue type syndrome. And those can be very challenging. They can be challenging if you don't know how to approach them too. So these chronic viruses will keep you tired, and they cause you to be achy and have difficulty sleeping. They're a situation where they need to be treated, but alternating treatments. So any kind of illness you have, if you have it for a long period of time and there's an agent, if you use the same antimicrobial, whether it be natural or pharmaceutical, month after month after month after month, well, if that organism survives, either it's hiding out or it's developed an immunity. You know, it has mutated so that it's no longer affected by whatever the therapeutic is that you're using. With these chronic viruses, they are notorious for mutating. So I use botanicals, that's my therapeutic realm. I also use homeopathics. So I'll use one botanical for 1 week and another for another week, and I'll just keep alternating them. I'll do that for 3 months. But by doing that, you keep the organism guessing, and often you can make some good strides towards health, you know, so that you are a little more back on your feet. Is there anything else? I mean, it's about supporting the whole body. I work as a team member often with many other people. There might be an MD or a DO who is prescribing an antibiotic. There might not be. Sometimes my job is to help people get healthy enough so that they can go back on antibiotics. Their stomach is messed up, or their brain is totally messed up, their liver can't handle it anymore. You know, and as a naturopath, I have many tools in helping that body to get healthy enough so that then we can resume antimicrobials. I work with nutrition with my patients. I use a lot of homeopathy. I really stress coping strategies, because you need to keep dissipating the stress of this situation. It doesn't mean that you no longer have stress, but you're not hanging on to it. You're not allowing your body to sort of implode on itself. I'll encourage people to get some sort of exercise. You may be so exhausted you can't believe that I'm asking you to do some exercise. But it's not that I'm asking you to go out and run a marathon. Maybe you're just going to watch a YouTube on isometrics, you know, contract, relax, contract, relax. And you don't have to run a marathon, but you need to keep that body moving. Using some sort of energetic therapy, either Reiki or cranial sacral, or maybe you're using an acupuncturist. I use Bowen in my office, which is a very gentle connective tissue release technique from Australia. It has changed a lot of people's lives. But you know, getting some of that energetic input, because it's not just physical. When it's been going on for a long time, the whole body is depleted mentally, emotionally, physically, and so you need a variety of tools in order to repair itself. I'm open for questions. As I said, I've been treating it for a long time, so
Can
yes.
you speak at all to the, like Bonnie's mentioned, that, you know, people are discounting that chronic Lyme even exists and being treated. So can you speak a little bit, why are so many people in the medical community denying its existence and some people aren't? Like, what's that all about? Is it politics? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why some people are denying it. I mean, it could be politics, you know, it could be multiple reasons. I can't speak for other people. I mean, I have people who come, and I have a firm belief that you have something better to do than to come and see me. You know, if you've been sick for a long period of time and you're gonna carry all these bags of supplements that I see people, you know, acquire over the years, there must be some reason that you're really looking for help. So I don't have a problem believing you, but I can't tell you why other people don't. Like, yes?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like, the insurance companies, a lot of them just don't want to pay. I mean, that's really what we've found. And so, I mean, I had to go back and forth between a doctor in New York and doctors here, just so that I could get the right medicine and have it be paid for. So it's just, insurance is just off the wall right now. It really is.
I gather that for a lot of these tick-borne diseases, including Lyme, there's kind of an initial acute phase and the symptoms sound a lot like the flu. You know, you achy, maybe fevery, and so unless there's some other symptom, then you know, what's the, how can you go at it as a medical professional to actually diagnose it? You know, when I go to the doctor with the flu or flu-like symptoms, they say, oh, you have flu-like symptoms, you know. They don't take the blood test, or they don't even ask me about Lyme, you know, so.
Don't ask you about insect bites or.
Right. So what's.
Because it's not just ticks,
Is
you
it
know.
somehow different? You know, is there some other way? It seems like, you know, there could be a lot of people with flu-like symptoms who are getting tick-borne diseases, but it's not being caught because.
It's not being caught for a couple different reasons. Sometimes it's not being caught because an individual who's become acutely ill is, you know, they're busy. They got other things to do. And so they're not necessarily going to slow down and take care of themselves just because they have this little inconvenience. Or they might be, I mean, a category where I see people get very, very sick is, you know, busy mothers. You know, they're working, who have young children. You know, they're already overextended, they're already sleep deprived, and so they feel lousy. Well, they were already feeling lousy, and is this really different than that other lousy? So, I mean, I do use the Horowitz questionnaire, which, actually I didn't bring those with me, but I would think it's pretty common, or...
Yeah, if you're Lyme literate.
Yeah, I meant to bring those with me. But if you look up Dr. Horowitz's, it's in any of his books.
Yes.
Yes, and we just look up Horowitz Lyme questionnaire, and you should be able to find it online. So, I mean, I do use that. It's a great lab tool per se to see if someone maybe is at risk for a tick-borne illness. I find that pretty useful. I do use a lot of applied kinesiology muscle testing, but not everybody does. It's the only way I would have figured out how to treat it 26 years ago when I first started pulling ticks off of people when I was in Bethel, because there was nothing written, there was no internet, there was no papers written. You know, I was just seeing people that were being bit by ticks, pulling ticks off, seeing this ache, not always seeing a rash, but you know, there was this whole constellation of symptoms. Back then, I had one of my botanical houses put together Echinacea, Smilax, and Hydrastis one-to-one combination. Those are 3 botanicals as capsules, and I actually still use them acutely a lot. I'm a naturopathic physician. I moved back in '84. We have been trying since '84 to get the law updated. I practice under a law that was written in 1920. You know, the legislature finally was passed, legislation was finally passed that will now force the health department to come up with a formulary for naturopaths in the state of Connecticut. My colleagues in all the other states around me, you know, can prescribe. I can't even give you a B12 shot. So, you know, I have come up with many different ways. I was also trained by, I would call them old timers, sometimes I'm considered one now, I don't consider myself one. But, you know, who really looked at the person, looked at the whole person, and matched a person's symptoms to which botanicals would best help bring that person back into balance. And so, you know, I do practice a little differently than some of the young ones that are coming out of the University of Bridgeport. Not that it's bad, you know, it's just that my training was from the late 70s, early 80s, you know, and theirs is from today. But using those botanicals that help to support the immune system and kill off microbes. I use some pretty awful tasting teas that are from Central America. I figured if they're going to kill those parasites, they'd be pretty good at killing the, you know, the tick-borne illnesses, and they do. They work really well. So.
We were really big advocates for me, really, and so I had to really force my doctors to say, okay, let's do this test, let's do, you know, whatever the tests were back then, just to see. And even now, you know, like Dr. Stafford said, you can get new strains at any point in time. And so I live with the woods right in my backyard. I mean, you know it. And so I live in an area that you could easily get some other kind of tick-borne disease. And so I have had to say, okay, prophylactically, put me on antibiotics, just so that I don't get another reoccurrence with it. So you have to be an advocate to your doctor. So.
And one of the things that we had to fight, and a lot of that has been resolved now as far as laws are concerned. When Darren first got bit 25 years ago, we find the Lyme literate doctors, and they worked on him, and then he went into what we call remission. Sort of like cancer, it goes into remission, it goes in hiding, he's fine. And then there's a stress or a major transition in your life, and this is a known fact that the Lyme can come back again in full force. What happened is when we went back, because we now wanted to go see another Lyme literate doctor, saying, okay, we had the test, he had the spinal tap, he had all this work done, and the doctor retires.
Yeah.
No digital medical records to be found, no matter what we did. We asked them to go in the basements. We asked Stony Brook to look for the information.
Plus they had a fire.
And they had, so it's very important since that point, and this is key as far as I'm concerned. You need to keep records. Yeah, there are medical records, but you need to keep records. We have journals for the last at least 20 years, 15 years of journals listening to everything the doctor said is written down, every medication he ever had, every diagnosis, every symptom, it's all in our books. And that way we can go back, if we have to, again to a new doctor. This is what happened in 2005. This is what happened in 1995. It's important that you keep records of your own. Because when we went back to try to get records from one doctor who was very helpful, he had the medical records, it cost $250 to get those medical records.
Yep.
And it was like this much paperwork.
You know?
So it was kind of like, okay, we know that we've got to keep these records from this point on. So please do that at all times. And that isn't even just for chronic illness. It's a good idea. Everything to keep.
And one of those things too, you know, $250 for the medical records, but you know, if you're going to go to a Lyme literate doctor in Connecticut, most Lyme literate doctors do not accept insurances, so you're paying out of pocket. So if you, for me, the current doctor I have is on the shoreline, and his initial visit was $1,000, something like that. That was out of pocket. And then each other visit is $350. So it's not cheap. And you heard when I said earlier, I'm on disability. I can't pay for that stuff, you know. So you have to just be an advocate for yourself.
A friend of mine has lupus, and she's on a special diet, medicines and stuff like that. And what she told me she does is any supplement that her doctor or naturopath or anything like that, she writes it all down, and she's able to deduct that on her, you know, taxes or whatever. And the state allows it. They do allow that.
Yeah.
And then there's also some programs, I've never used it, but I've heard about it. It's called RX.
Yes.
Access or.
Yes. Yeah, if you fall within a certain financial,
Yeah.
they will help cover your medication, absolutely.
And there's a lot of drug companies too that if you call them, I have a friend that has MS, and she called, even my aunt who has insurance, and her medicine for her macular degeneration, she got $1,000 off of that, just by calling the company and saying, listen, you know.
Yeah, we had looked into that at one point when he was on, I don't know if it was the Meprin or the Malarum, but it was $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And you actually had to show, they wouldn't start paying until you were at a certain amount.
Yeah.
And because this started where I believe it was April at $1,200 a month, he had met his max. And they said they couldn't give it to us at that point in time. It has to start from January, and in January he had his medical insurance cover it. So we had some issues with that and we couldn't get it. But just kind of as an aside to that, Darren is right as far as paying up front for most Lyme literate doctors. And most doctors now in general, but you can put that claim into your insurance company. You are not going to get the $1,200, you're not going to get the $900, you're probably going to get $150, depending upon your health insurance company. So they will cover some of it, but you have to pay it up front when you go.
But if you have an HSA or something like that, you can use your,
Right.
if you have an HSA or some sort of health savings account, you can use that. I mean, most of my patients use their HSA for my visits, and then, you know, we do, because we type out a plan on the computer, you know, then we sign it, and that helps people for deducting it if they need the deduction for,
And ours, we used to
taxes.
call it a flexible spending.
Right.
I don't know if you know what the name of it is, but ours we're called flexible spending.
I have a question for Darren.
Oh, okay.
You said you're on IV Rocephin and you're on something else IV. What is that?
The other one is IVIG, it's called
And-
immunoglobulin. So it's
Okay.
kind of the, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of the white blood cell count, or the white blood cells that are scrubbed, I guess, and they put that into your body.
And that's supposed to boost your immune system, or?
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
it's passively supporting your immune system. Because your immune system's not producing enough of its own, so it gives a passive boost.
And how did you know, what were your symptoms that indicated that you needed to have that?
Sure. Well, with Bell's palsy, I was, like I said earlier, I was in a lot of pain, forgetful, not knowing vocabulary. I would walk into a room, had no idea even why I was there,
I think as far as the IV, I think you're asking about the IVIG specifically.
Yeah.
And I think this was the third time, if I remember correctly, he had it. He had it early on, quite a few years ago. And then when he went into remission, he didn't need it anymore. But very recently, he started with the really excruciating pains again and memory issues. Cognitive issues are a major piece of that. And it was very, very interesting in the respect that he had the IVIG. And after a year, the health insurance, without telling him, took him off of it.
Yeah.
Stopped giving him the medication. And they went back to his Lyme literate doctor, and the Lyme literate doctor said, he needs it. Well, it can't be working. He's had it for a year and he's not doing any better. So they had him off of it for 3 months, 3 or 4 months, and 3 weeks, and it was like he couldn't even remember anything.
Yeah,
Oh, so after you were off of it,
Yeah.
so the IgM or whatever was
Yeah.
helping you with your cognitive issues?
yeah, I mean, it
So
was,
that,
Wow.
so that was
Right,
kind of
yeah.
how they figured, oh, I guess we better allow him to have it.
Dr. Riley, you mentioned neurotransmitter support. So we know there's neurological symptoms that go along with Lyme and some infection and excuse me. Have you worked with any patients that had neuropsychiatric issues? And can you talk to us about that, a little bit, your experience with it and what it means to...
Well, like this kid that's going off to college, I mean, that was, he was just in a panic and very depressed and couldn't put two words together. I mean, he had to drop out of school because his brain just was not functioning at all. As a naturopath, I start with the basics. So first we worked on cleaning up his diet. He was on antibiotics from another practitioner, but he wasn't getting the response that he should have been getting. And so he stayed on those antibiotics. We worked on cleaning up his diet. We worked on helping him come up with some stress coping strategies. I was doing bone on him once a week as an energetic push. I do use a lot of homeopathics, which, so homeopathy, for people who don't know, is using a very minute, it's not really the actual substance, using the energy of a substance to help bring the body back into alignment. So I do use homeopathic, Lyme disease, or ehrlichiosis, Bartonella, whatever it is that I need, whatever organism that I feel that the body is not responding properly to. So I use that with him. And we did actually do a hair mineral analysis. He had been a typical kid on a standard American diet, so we worked on correcting some of those things. You don't have to take pills if you can just eat properly. So, I try to get people to eat better. And over time, his brain was starting to become a little more present. So less of the OCD stuff, less of the anxiety, still really depressed. So then we actually went, and there is different companies where you can do neurotransmitter testing through urine. You can do blood. I prefer the urine tests. And so once those tests came back, we found out exactly where his imbalances were. We had brought him to a certain point, and then we needed to bring him a little further along. So we just used that testing to find out where his particular imbalances were, and gave him the amino acids and the vitamins that he needed, a few botanicals as well, to sort of help bring those back on track. And it was a matter of being persistent. He wasn't happy about being patient. He's in his young 20s and wanted to be on with his life, and certainly didn't want to be back home. That was a constant thing that we heard about. But with persistence and the like, and keeping track and just really monitoring and making sure that you're actually gaining ground. So now the depression's gone, the OCD is gone, the anxiety's gone, and he can study. He can study, he can learn things, he can retain things. We can carry on a conversation. And when I first met him, I was like, oh yeah, okay, we're going to go wandering all around the room and back. And I'm not necessarily going to get a lot of information out of him because he just couldn't really follow. I mean, I'd ask him a question and he didn't really answer it. So sometimes those Horowitz, the questionnaire, I use that because sometimes it will help people, but sometimes people are so bad off they can't really even read the questionnaire. I'll have a staff work with that person and read the questions and make sure that they actually answer the question that was read to them. But yeah, so it's a lot of different factors. Yes?
Is he still on medication now, any of your homeopathic medicines or anything like
He's
that?
on homeopathics.
Okay.
Once I've gotten a person back on track with any kind of tick-borne illnesses, actually there's a homeopathic combination that I've been using for decades, which really, won't 100% prevent you from getting it again, but most often it will really, if you start slipping, you'll slip much slower. We'll have a little more time to gather our defenses and get you back on track, but many times it will actually keep you from getting it again. So right now he's just on some homeopathics. He is going to California, so they do have Lyme disease in California. And he is on some basic brain support, and then a few nutritional things because we're going off to dorm food, and we want to monitor. We don't want to slip too much.
One of the things to piggyback on the neuropsych part of it, so I'm a mental health and substance abuse counselor, and so, I deal with a lot of people with chronic pain and different things like that, and so that affects the the neurons in the brain tremendously. And so it affects, depression, it affects anxiety, it affects various things. And so what I try to do is I try to talk with people and view them, as a whole. Why are you using this substance? Like, they're using cocaine because, they are just depressed all the time, and they want to get up and move and do whatever. They'll say just a bump or whatever, but, it's like you have to cater to that individual's person. So if they have some kind of a mental health issue or whatever that goes along with the Lyme, then that's probably going to even get worse with the Lyme. For me, I take medicine for depression and anxiety. So the anxiety is kind of more at nighttime anyway, because I can't sleep. And so, and then having this disease for so long and dealing with the pain, I'm also on opiates. And so that just messes up the neurons in the brain even more. So, all the different endorphins are not being created by my body anymore. It's being created by the opiates that I need to take. So.
Depression and anxiety come before or after the Lyme?
After.
After, those are real.
Yeah.
I have just a couple quick personal success stories, I think. On Saturday, I noticed a big rash, and when I saw the slides, I said, wow, it looked just like that. And I had been working outdoors, and I never found a tick, but it looked so much like the classic kind of big rash. And thanks to my wife, she says, you're not going to call the nurse line, And so I called the nurse line for our insurance and talked for a while, and described it, and she said, you have to go, right away on Saturday. And it was I waited until after 5 o'clock, so I ended up having to go to the emergency room in Manchester. But I waited there, and a professional came and checked me out, and I got a prescription for one of the antibiotics, and then I went to the doctor the next week and got checked out again. Actually got a blood test, and so I went through this nasty course of antibiotics, but it probably prevented me from getting Lyme disease potentially. And with our kids, I just want to say we have found ticks on them, and we fortunately have gotten them off right away. And we typically take a Sharpie and just put a mark there, which reminds us to keep an eye on it, and they keep an eye on it, and then we make sure they don't have any symptoms and so forth. So that's just a little trick that works pretty well.
But the rash could show up, you could get bit here, and you get the rash
Yeah,
here.
you're still, at least you have the mark on them, so you're kind of aware, and it reminds you for at least a week, because the Sharpie will stay on.
Especially a boy.
Yeah.
So, and yes, the rash is even less than 50% of the time anyways. But my recommendation for all my patients is, when you're removing that tick, remove the whole tick. Don't be squeamish about it, just take the whole rascal out. And then I always have my patients use some type of drawing salve. Black salve is a old one, or I have one that's with comfrey, or if you don't have a drawing salve, use even like a clay mask or something like that. You want to draw all the bacteria, all the spirochetes, all the organisms out of that site. And I want to not be able to see that site in a week. If that site is still festering a week later, you've got something brewing, and you need to take care of it. You might not be achy yet, but that site, something's brewing at that site, and you want to be assertive about it and make sure that you're, go somebody and make sure that they're helping you take care of that. It's just all my patients don't want to see that site a week later at all.
One of the medical conferences that we went to, they were talking about other forms of rashes. And when they were talking about babesiosis, apparently now they're finding that you can get a rash from that particular bacteria as well, but it looks like stretch marks. So if you get those stretch marks across your back, it's possible that you did get bit by the tick that might be carrying the babesiosis. So when you get that kind of
it may not be Lyme, but it could very well be another one of the bacteria. So, you know, for some of us, we have stretch marks anyway, especially if you've had kids.
These are very
These are,
notorious.
yeah,
You know,
they go,
It's not that you gained weight and that you have stretch marks. You know, it's that you have normal tissue that just now has striations on it. So, yeah.
Well, is it babesiosis or Bartonella?
Bartonella.
is it Bartonella?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's good to
But
know.
for babesiosis, one of the biggest tells for that, for me anyway, was at night when I'm sleeping, I'll have to have long sleeve shirts on, or else if I have short sleeve shirts on, I will sweat. And it boggles my mind to think of it that way, but it's the opposite of what you would actually assume. And so I'd be sweating at night so much that the bed would just be wet. And so, so basically it's like malaria, like you said. And so the Malarone that I had to take for it was $900 a month. So,
Sharon, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, from the public health standpoint, we know that Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses are definitely an issue. I thank everyone for coming together and for this discussion, because I think it's so important, the prevention piece, and people getting the information so that they can be more aware that they're, you know, we want our kids to be able to go out and play. I want to be able to sit in my yard and work in my garden, and I want to enjoy that, and I play golf and do those things. And I think we all, we live in an area where these ticks are rampant, but doing our best to do the tick checks, take that shower, get in and tub and soap, make sure that if you've been out there that you get the ticks off of you, as Kirby had mentioned. It takes a while for them to get to that point and then to begin to feed, so if we get them off early, then we're way ahead of the game. So we realize that there are thousands and thousands of people every year who are diagnosed, and finding physicians who are Lyme literate, it's so important, and physicians who will look at it from maybe a little bit different perspective and use the holistic approach. That there are a lot of great treatments and ideas out there, and we need to have a broader thought on how we treat some of these illnesses. Work together, communicate is so important.
And it is interesting, I just want to mention that we certainly believe in Reiki as well as acupuncture, because in the past Darren has had that as well. And there were times when it worked, it was doing, you know, what it needed to do, but then there are other times when he's at his worst. You know, it might work for a couple of hours, but then he's back to feeling the way he was. But certainly it works, you know, and try it. If you get to that point, if somebody does have Lyme or any of the tick-borne illnesses, it's worth a shot because it can help.
It won't do it by itself, but it is part of a whole package of approach, you know, so you get better. But we like to remind people you don't have to be out in the woods in order to get Lyme disease. One year when I was in Bethel, I had these 3 cases in a row, and these people said, I never go for a walk. All I did was go from their house to the car. Well, that's all you have to do. And it's rampant in New York City. One of my sons lives in New York City. Well, there's not that much woods in New York City. So, you know, don't think that just because you haven't gone out in the woods that you are immune to it, because that's not true.
And we tell people that when we go out and do presentations. We do a lot of presentations. I'm sure some of you heard that that's one of the key things that we do as an organization, the awareness piece and the prevention. But certainly we tell people, you do not have to live in the woods. You do not have to live in the country. This can happen living in the city. And we try to explain how that happens. So it's very important that we try to get that information out as well.
Winnie?
Are there any support groups for Lyme disease sufferers?
Well, there are a couple. I mean, we've come across a couple. I'm not sure if Betty's here. She's not here. She's in the back. When we were down doing a program in Meriden they told us there was a support group there. There's one I understand that meets now, I think Windsor, that used to be in Farmington or
I
something.
attend one twice a month in Unionville on Britton Avenue,
Okay.
first and third Thursdays of the month, 7 p.m.
Yeah. And actually, we did talk with someone else
The
in
people that are
Middletown.
most involved with it have been long-term sufferers of chronic Lyme, so they're a wealth of information.
Yeah.
And the internet, I mean, if you go on the internet, you just type in Lyme, you'll find all these different nonprofits that are created, or just kind of support group that are created on the internet, and you just type in how you're feeling, and everybody comes up with different ideas and stuff. You know, it's actually really
Facebook
good.
is
Yeah,
key.
yeah.
We're always
Facebook
getting
is awesome,
information
yeah.
from Facebook.
So the measure on tick checking is that it's usually expressed as, if you've been working outside, do the tick check, that type of thing, like playing outside. But if we have outdoor pets and they bring in the tick, my most recent infection, it was like, I noticed I thought it was a spider bite, like on Monday morning. Now I'm convinced on Sunday afternoon, I'm all done with outside and took my shower, did my tick check, sat down on the couch, and the bite was on the back of the leg. And, so I noticed, interestingly, I never saw the tick. And it was never, it wasn't more than probably 12 hours, since, I done, tick check. And I'm pretty convinced it wasn't there, but this is the one time I actually got the, Rheumatic rash, previous section not, that I know of. So, but my point is just that if you have outdoor pets, and I'm pretty sure that's what you gotta be more vigilant. Not just checking, if you haven't gone outside in a week, doesn't mean you're possibly gonna get bit.
And that's what I was telling the kids when I did the Awares program from them earlier today. I said, we all love our pets. They come in, you hug them. Some of them you allow in bed with you. I have a dog, I love her dearly, but she's not gonna be in my bed. She's like a golden retriever, so she's not gonna go in there. But it's like, you've gotta check your dogs too, It's very important, just like you said, because they're bringing them in, and you're hugging them, and that drops off them, or it's in bed with you, and it drops off or whatever. Now you have to worry about the tick in the house or in the bed with you, not just your animal. So I'm telling the kids, okay to love them, but you got to make sure that, you check them just like you check yourself. So that's key.
And they get it too. They get Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Times of year when these ticks are around, is it year-round, or obviously mostly during the summer, or?
It's,
He did have a great slide, but this January, we did not have snow, and so I had some new cases with new tick bites, people coming in with acute Lyme in January, and you're like, can't we have a break, But the previous year, of course, we did have a break for a couple of months. But yeah, if you're in Connecticut, you really need to be vigilant year-round. Yes, in the summer there is an upswing, but I wouldn't just assume that you only have to worry about it in the summer, because that's just not true.
like the deep freezes, if you get 10 below zero for a week straight or something, that's usually when you can say, okay, I don't have to worry too much about it.
And the reason, when we have the presentations, people will say to us, well, I saw them in February, which is why we say normally it's 10 months of the year, but the last 2 years it has been really 12 months. What happened the year before, it's interesting, we got so much snow piled up that literally, time after time, those lizards, and they're in the ground, they're under the leaves, all that snow packed them and actually created an igloo effect. So they stayed nice and warm. So when all that snow melted, then guess what? They come out. So not as many died as normally they would in the wintertime. So that's one of the reasons why we had so many that year. And then this year, as everyone has said, it's been relatively warm, so we had more this year. also.
I think right around your house, any gardening beds, landscaping that'd be true, but that, the foundation, and get heat, leaking, the foundation only gets so cold, so if they're in enough proximity, that no matter how cold it gets, some will probably survive
Still
it.
staying warm.
I just have, out of curiosity, has anyone ever noticed, like, going to the woods and you're with someone and, like, you get tons of ticks on you and they get none?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
That's very true.
I have a theory on that.
I was always convinced it's because my friend was very Italian, and I was convinced for a while that it's because of that. And I was like, maybe it's because she's more garlic than me or something, but I don't know.
There you go.
I was
No,
always
it's the
curious.
wine, it's the wine.
I know that bugs in general are attracted to carbon dioxide, and some people emit more carbon dioxide than others.
Okay.
So I don't know, I could be completely wrong on that, but that's my theory.
You have a comment to that. I went to the Mass Lyme Conference in May, just this past year, and somebody did, one of the physicians there did comment that everybody emits, not a pheromone, but I guess an odor or a smell or something, and they're attracted to certain odors. Like one person will be bit, and that goes with mosquitoes also. One person will be bit by
bees.
mosquitoes and another will not.
Yeah.
It's because of what they're emitting.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
We were there too.
Oh, you were?
We found that to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Because bees will do that. You could be with someone,
Right.
be with someone,
Mhm.
and somebody else gets the bee stung, whatever, from them. Same thing with the mosquitoes and so forth. So we used to joke before we heard this, because he got bit 3 times, 3 different occasions, that we began to say he was like a magnet.
Yeah.
Of course, now I joke and I say he was a tick magnet,
Yeah.
because it wasn't married back then, he was a tick magnet. But yeah, he ended up getting bit 3 times.
Question maybe for Karen, as the nurse. Can you comment on the effect of possibly getting infected at a time when you're on antibiotics or corticosteroids? Like a lot of people are in prednisones for various reasons, things like that. And on the immune response and what that might mean for, being able to test serologically.
Does make it more
Good
difficult,
symptoms.
yes. I mean, I do run lab too, and if you're on an antibiotic, the labs are gonna be even less reliable. And obviously, if you get infected when you're on antibiotics, then whatever you've been infected with is resistant to that particular antibiotic. And we do know that not all ticks carry Lyme, but not all ticks carry the same complement of diseases too. So it could be that you're on an antibiotic that will kill off Lyme, but not necessarily Bartonella. And so what you've done is you've picked up a Bartonella infection, on top of that Lyme infection that you already have. I mean, from a naturopath perspective, we work on bolstering the immune system so that your immune system is more vigilant, your white blood cells are more active and more capable of keeping you, protected in the first place. And so if somebody's on steroids, because steroids do suppress the immune system, then we'll do different things to help them not be so vulnerable, whether homeopathically or botanically or something like that. There's ways of protecting the person. You just have to know that you're on a drug that needs to be complemented.
And be careful too, because what I've found for my body, and it doesn't mean it's for everyone, but any kind of steroid that I've gone on, it's actually made my Lyme worse.
Yeah.
So just be careful with that.
He was actually in remission about 5 years ago, and he was out doing his yard and got poison ivy or poison oak and ended up getting the steroid for it, and that's what brought it back up again. And he's been this, for the last 5 years in really bad shape from the infection, but that's what happens with him.
And that's not unusual. I mean, I will have patients that are head to toe poison ivy, and then, I'll have them come in and we'll put them on adrenal support and other things, and we'll start it right away. They'll say, oh, well, I'll just rebuild my adrenals after the steroids. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's protect you now, because the steroid's going to suppress you now, and then we will continue to rebuild your adrenal glands after you're off the steroids. I might be a naturopath, that doesn't mean that we don't believe in using things when you need them. It's just a lot of times I'll be complementing that so that you can use the pharmaceuticals that you need, get the component that you need, but without having the side effects.
Well, and the interesting thing with him was because of his memory loss, he forgot that he couldn't take steroids, or couldn't take it without some, you know, a supplement like that, some sort of support. So that was his issue, that he didn't realize that. They gave it to him, he thought, great, now I'm not gonna have it all over my body, and then realizing after the fact that he needed to get assistance.
But you become an expert on whatever meds
Right.
you have to take. You know, if you don't become that expert for yourself, then you're not going to be able to understand, okay, this doc is telling me to do this doc is telling me to do this. You know, is it okay to combine those two? Or do they have to be separate? Or because it's naturopath, do I even need these meds over here? So, you know, if you're not really becoming that expert yourself, it's going to harm you in the long run. One of my things that I've done, because I've had it for so long, I know a lot of different medications and the effects of them. And so that has kind of gone into my counseling side of it too. So I'm never going to tell them to take or not take medicine without consulting a doctor. Don't worry about that.
Or a pharmacist.
Right.
I mean, because sometimes you have so many different providers in your team who are not necessarily collaborating. And I will use a pharmacist. I'll just, you know, write down everything and pop it off to her. I've got a great gal who will really look at it all, because these days a lot of times, you know, well, you may have gotten the medication from different sources, so you don't have the old-time pharmacist that you used to have that was the only source, and so they were looking over your back, per se. But also there is a time crunch, you know, pharmacists have to produce so many, you know, fill so many scripts per hour, and blah, 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 so they don't always, ideally they should have all the time to check and make sure everything's covered, but they don't always. So be in charge of your health. When I meet a patient for the first time, one of the first things I say is, you ultimately in charge of your own health, and you need to keep records. If I run lab, I'm going to hand you a copy whether you want it or not. I'm going to explain it to you, but make sure that you have a copy of all that and know what you're taking and why you're taking it. The internet's great, you can learn a lot, but there's not always good checks and balances on some of the information that you might get off the internet. So you want to make sure it's actually safe for you. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's going to be safe for you.
The other thing that's always, I think it is great, that if you have a partner or, you know, whatever, someone that can work with you and be with you when you go to the doctor's office, and they're okay that they can hear what the doctor has to say. Because if you do have the illness and you begin to have cognitive issues or memory issues, number one, you're not going to be able to write it down, everything the doctor says. It's important that somebody else is hearing the same thing that you're hearing, so that afterwards you can kind of talk about it, and you'll have someone else that remembers those things, so that when you have to go back again, or you have to be careful of what you're taking, that you have someone that knows, no, you're not supposed to be doing that today. I think that's key, to have someone as a partner that's willing to be part of that.
And at one point I had to, my doc started me on some other kind of med, and I knew that he wanted me on CoQ10, whatever, yeah, that CoQ10 stuff. But I had read somewhere, or I found out somewhere that doesn't go well with this new med. And I told him in the office, I said, so should I stop this other med? Oh yeah, you might want to stop that med. Okay. So, you know, you have to be that expert.
A point about, you made a point about not having your own medical records, having copies. In addition to that, is that when you go to see a practitioner for a particular symptom, not necessarily related to a Lyme or Lyme disease, but anything, is to present the full, as full as you can, medical history.
Yep.
Because if you don't think something is significant, and you don't make that as a doctor aware, you may have enough challenge with doctors to have them consider that, whatever earlier symptoms that apparently are resolved, but really may not be, just in remission or something, that are cropping up again, in terms of doing a differential diagnosis, they may completely miss one path, the diagnosis tree, because you haven't told them
Sure.
that you had these symptoms once before. And if you with Lyme being something that does show up different symptoms later on, very important topic.
Any other questions? Thank you all very, very
Yes,
much.
thank you.